Good morning. This is my morning view, and today it is winter edition 2025, and there's a good 4 or 5 inches of snow already. So today was a snow day at work. That means no work. All right. Today it is Tips Tuesday, and we are continuing the Nativity series for this season. But we only have 2 days, so I have to hurry up and give you more of the story, because I'm not going to do it on Christmas morning. All right. We have covered the angel coming to Mary. Before that, Zechariah, the angel coming to Zechariah. We talked about Mary and Elizabeth getting together with the joy that was taking place inside the womb of Elizabeth when she heard the news. We talked about Joseph stepping up and having the visitation in a dream from the angel to not be afraid to take on this task. And then we talked about the travel from Nazareth to Bethlehem. We talked about the census. We talked about some time situations that can kind of depict the year-ish of when Christ was born. And then we talked about the inn. We talked about the house or the stable or the cave and the possibilities of those. So we're moving right along, and we even talked about the shepherds a little bit because that had to do with one of the possibilities of stable, the Tower of Magda. So with that, we talked a little bit about the shepherds as well. So I guess a good time to bring in the wise men would be now. I'm just trying to think of what else needs to be said. We have the star, of course. So the star, which will usher in the wise men. So we'll do that. So if anybody has ever heard, I think there's a documentary called The Star. I think that's the documentary name, and it talks about the constellations. It talks about the different things in the sky that take place, and that God made the stars in the sky as a sign for times and seasons. And so, the New Age has taken on, it's all about the zodiac and have them tell you what you need to do with your life according to, the stars. But that's not what the stars are for. The stars are there by God, however, and they are for signs and seasons. And they tell a story, believe it or not. They tell a story. So if you can find that documentary, that would be awesome. If I happen to come across it, I will put it in the links down below. The link for it down below. I'm not sure if it's something I can find on YouTube, but we'll figure it out, right? That also gives you a time frame of when Christ was born, that particular documentary. Now, we're going to move on to this star. First of all, the star was first talked about in Genesis when Moses was out in the desert with the Israelites. There was a prophet named Balaam. That's how far back we're going here. There was a prophet named Balaam, and he was hired by a ruler to curse the Israelites. But Balaam, as a prophet, could only do what God told him to do. And so he's not an Israelite prophet, but he is a prophet of God. So he's not quite always, like he's looking on getting some profit out of this, right? There's some profit that he can get here, and he's like, oh yeah, I can do this. So so he's basically like a gun for hire. and he goes and he tells the king what he needs done. He needs some sacrifices, he needs this, he needs that, we're going to do this. And then he ends up blessing Israel. He ends up blessing the Israelites. And the king is like, what are you doing? I hired you to curse them, not to bless them. And he goes, well, maybe if we try it from another mountain, and we'll do it that. And I need these sacrifices, and gather me all the stuff I need for the sacrifices, and I'll curse them there. And so he gets up there, and the same thing happens. He blesses Israel, and the king's like, what? I'm telling you, I hired you to curse them. Stop blessing them. Why are you blessing them? He goes, well, because I can only say what God tells me to say. I can only say what God tells me to say. That's it. So if God's telling me to bless them, that's all I can do. But we'll try it one more time. We'll try it over here on this other hill. And he goes up there and he has a prophetic message, and it is concerning a star. Now, a lot of people think that the Star of David is the Star of David, and it is in reference to a king, a lion, a king that will be born. And so they reference this Star of David, and it has to do with this prophetic word, except for it wasn't for the Star of David. It was for Christ's star. It was for the Messiah's star. And it was in reference to what we're going to talk about next. Now, move forward after the time of David, and Israel and Judah are not serving God the way they're supposed to. So God puts them in. He allows Nebuchadnezzar to come in and take prisoners to where they're exiled into another land, and he takes some choice young men that were from the court, and he makes them eunuchs, and it's to teach them the ways of the Chaldeans. Now, they don't want them procreating, that's why they're eunuchs, but they're going to teach them all things Chaldeans. And so what happens is Daniel stands out amongst some of these. There's about 10 young men that Daniel says, hey, we're not going to eat the king's stuff. We're just going to do some fruits and vegetables and check to see who's healthier at the end of this little test. And they agreed to it. They're like, okay, yeah, sure. And they ended up being healthier. That's that vegetarian diet. It wasn't about diet. It was about not eating the food that was offered to idols. So remember that the next time you want to say that God wants us to be vegetarian. Yes, we started out as vegetarians, but after Noah, that changed. And there were some restrictive diets in the Jewish faith because, well, you know, they didn't have refrigeration and other things like that, and knowing about the sanitary things about certain stuff. So, you know, you couldn't do strangled meat, you couldn't do pork, things that were unclean. There's a reason for that. There's a medical, health reason for that. Okay, so it turns out that Daniel did really well. Well, Daniel just didn't stop there. He also was able to interpret Nebuchadnezzar's dream. So that put him up in this space where he was better than the king's men, as far as his magi, his magicians, his sorcerers, his all his entourage that could do all things mystical back then. And so what happened is, when they couldn't interpret it, Daniel did. And it was true. And so Daniel ended up being the chief Magi, the chief of the magicians. Now, this brings us to another point. Daniel, being chief and of the Magi, that means he instructed them. Now, he also had an intel to the Lord. He had an intel to prophetic. He had dreams. He had visions. He visited places where he saw Christ. There are things that Daniel could not write down. He could not talk about because it was sealed. It was sealed and was not going to be revealed until the time that it could be revealed. And so, therefore, Daniel had intel that not anybody else had. And there are some things that he could share and some things he couldn't share. So Daniel, the chief Magi, talked to his students about the coming Christ, about the Messiah, about how you were going to see in these signs and symbols of the sky. Right? Remember, God placed the stars in the sky as signs. And so, signs and symbols. And so here we are with this storyline in the sky that's going to take place. And so when Christ was born and the star rose, it had to do with the different planets, the different constellations merging in a certain way that created it to be brighter than it normally was. And they knew, this is what we've been waiting for. This is what Daniel talked about of old. All those hundreds of years prior, when Daniel talked about this to us and he taught us what was going to happen when this took place in the sky. And so we need to go and send a delegate. We need to go and worship the new king. We need to worship the king that was promised. And so that is where the Magi come from. Now, they may not have been Babylonian. They may have been descendants of the Medes. They could have been descendants of the Medes. They could have been Nabateans. Nabateans only showed up like 700 BC to about 780. They popped up and then they disappeared. They were wealthy. They were traders. They knew the trade routes. They had resource. They had the ability to get spices, frankincense, myrrh in abundance because they were merchants. And so when you have this possibility that showed up and gained strength and financial wealth, and if they were descendants of the Magi and possibly the Medes and the Chaldeans, they all kind of same area, it's quite possible that that's who these people were. See, the Bible when I was telling you the other day about how we have this idea of the nativity in our head, and it's like, okay, this is how we were taught, and this is how it all looks in the merchandise when we set it up on our lawn. This is our little, nativity underneath our tree. This is what it looks like. And it's not necessarily what it looks like. They were called Magi. They were magicians. They were not necessarily kings, but they were wealthy because they were able to bring with them gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And some of those things are not that cheap. Even back then, they were things brought for a king. There was enough for a king. You're not going to bring a measly little bit. Here's some gold. Here's some frankincense, baby. Here's some myrrh. No, this is a king. They're come to worship a king. Remember when the Queen of Sheba came up to visit Solomon? There's a thing back in the day that it's like the better king brought the better gift. They were going to one-up each other. It's like, okay, we're going to bring the best that we have because we want to show that we are the better king. Except for they weren't kings, possibly. They may have been kings of their own ruling area, but they were magi. That was the key part in the Bible. And so even as non-kings, people of today, you always try to one up on people. You're like, oh yeah, I'm going to show you that I'm better than you by showing up with more of what needs to be brought. Philanthropists, they're big on this, right? So here we are, the Magi. I'm going to call them Magi, not kings. It does not say there were 3 of them. It says there were 3 types of gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. That did not necessarily mean one little box. One little box, one little box, one little box. It may have been caravans. Caravans. And remember, they're bringing things that are expensive, so therefore they're going to have an entourage with them to guard what they are bringing. They're used to the trade routes. Trade routes often had thieves that would attack caravans, right? So this is where my thought is going, is that they're more than likely merchants, descendants of the Magi. They're Magi within themselves because, you can have more than one occupation. And when you're looking at the Magi, the chances are that they had an actual occupation as well as doing what they were doing. Daniel, being the chief Magi, he was also part of the king's court in decision making. He was a politician, if you will. So with that, hello, 2 jobs. Okay. Moving right along. They see the star in the sky and they're like, okay, we need to go check out this baby. We need to go check out this king. There's a king going to be born, and we've been taught this all our lives. It's been passed down from generation to generation, and it is game on. Let's move out. Now, remember I told you that Mary took probably about 2 weeks to get from Nazareth to Bethlehem. Now, we're talking a country the size of the state of New Jersey. Okay? It's not that big on the grand scale of things. And yet it's just so always in the news. There's a reason for that. But this is not the story for it. So when it comes, and it kind of is. So you have her taking about 2 weeks. That was a 4-day to 10-day travel on average, right? Now we're taking that it took her the later time because she was pregnant. And so I'm sure it slowed the process down of getting to where they were going. Just think they're coming from the east, wherever the east is. It does not say where they came from the east. You know, you have those songs, again, from Orient, you know, and so you're thinking, oh, the dude's Chinese. It could have been Afghanistan, you know. It could have been from Iraq, Iran, anywhere over there. But you got to remember they can only travel at night because they're following a star. They're not just following the trade routes, they're following a star. And so the star will shine at night, and therefore that's when they're going to have to travel. But traveling at night is a little slower. It's not like our time today. Like my daughter used to love traveling at night. She'd get on the highway. There was less cars. You can travel faster. No, back in the day, that was not the case. There was treacherous things happening at night. You had anywhere from bandits and thieves to cliffs, edges, stumbling over rocks. You know, if your camel stumbled over a rock and broke his leg, you know, that could have been very detrimental. It was a slow, steady process. So it's going to take you longer to travel at night than it would during the day. Of course, if you're traveling in the summertime during the day, that would be brutal and you would have to find shelter. And so traveling during the day in the summer would have been more difficult. But we were talking about the possibility that it probably wasn't in the winter. Traveling at night in the winter would have been brutal too. Would have been twice as cold. 3 times as cold, 4 times as cold. Who knows how cold? But cold, right? So you're not going to travel in the winter. You're going to travel probably in the spring or in the fall. And so when the star showed up, they took flight. They started to move out. They're like, okay, we have this plan. We got to get this all together. We got to get our gold. We got to get our supplies. We got to get our caravan together, and we're moving out. And traveling in a pack like that also causes you to slow down, because the one thing that I learned is you're only as fast as your slowest person. So if your slowest person is going to arrive with you, you are only as fast as that slowest person. It's not a race. Who's going to get there first? We're going to get there together. Kind of like the Crucible. Okay. So here we go. I was pre-Crucible time in the Marine Corps, but I've learned a few things about it. And one of those things is that everybody finishes on the team. Everybody on the team has to finish. So with that, everybody on this team is going to finish, because that's how important this is. And it's not every man for himself. So they travel. And by the time they get there, he is not in a stable. Baby Jesus is not in a stable. He is in a house. They said they came upon the child at his house. So 2 years and under is where King Herod had the babies killed. I think I'm going to talk about that tomorrow. For now, we're just going to talk about the kings traveling. They get to Jerusalem. They ask King Herod, you know, where's the newborn king? Because we came to worship him. We've been following a star, and we came to worship him. King Herod didn't know. He was all about himself. Hey, I'm building buildings. I'm making things great in this country, you know, and you know, I'm the guy, you know. I'm going to leave this legacy because I'm such a great architect and you know, mind, and I'm just the big hunk of stinky cheese. And so here he is, not knowing where the baby is to be born. So he asks his advisors, you know, go find out. So here you have the scribes, aka religious lawyers, political religious lawyers, going, and they're finding out, okay, where is the Messiah supposed to be born? Where is this king supposed to be born? And it comes up with Bethlehem. Bethlehem, the city where David came from, right? The city where David came from. And so, at that, he's like, okay. He tells them where it is, and he says, when you find him, come and tell me, because I'd like to go worship him too. Okay? So I'm going to have you do the work, and you tell me where he's at. Come back and tell me, and that way I can go worship him too. And they go, and they find the child at the house, not the baby at the stable. And they present him with gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And then they have a dream. Again, dreams. Now, Magi's, they are going to take dreams very serious. Daniel took dreams serious. Joseph took dreams serious. They are going to take things serious. That they see that it is a plot from Herod to do evil. And so, therefore, they are going to go home a different route, not the route of Jerusalem, and take a different journey home than they came, so that they would get out of there safely. And so that's what they did. And in that dream, they knew what they had to do. So sometimes you got to take your dreams seriously. I talked about dreams the other day when we were talking about Joseph. So if you haven't seen that, go back and watch the YouTube channel and listen to it on fast speed while you're doing laundry, while you're doing dishes, while you're doing chores, and get caught up on some of the story of the Nativity, if this is the first one you're watching today. So they take dreams serious, which brings us to yet another dream. And we'll talk about that dream tomorrow when we talk about Herod and how he plans on worshiping the Christ, the Messiah, the Jesus, the newborn king, the king that he didn't want him to rule because he was the ruler. All right. That's all I have for you today. Go over to YouTube, Mona E. Harrison, different than my Facebook profile, and hit subscribe. Hit subscribe. All right. Blessings, everybody. Have a great day. I will see you tomorrow when we'll cover King Herod and the travel to Egypt. All right. Blessings, everybody. Have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow. You know, I probably should have waited till after Christmas to do the wise men and the journey to Egypt, because that happened after Christmas. But I figured, well, let's get it all done. Let's get it all done before Christmas, because Christmas Day I'm not going to be on, other than to just wish you a Merry Christmas. Thank you, Michael, for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow. Blessings.